Hello, cheese connoisseurs, it's Silent Signs from I Dream of Indie, and today we are taking a look at first-person narrative puzzle game Quintus and the Absent Truth on the Nintendo Switch. This adventure comes from developer Wreck Tangle Games and publisher eastasiasoft. The game was previously released on PC and tells us the story of Alan Shaw, a musician who hasn't produced a song in over a decade. Alan wakes up on the day of his daughter's birthday to discover that she is missing and under rather mysterious circumstances. Now, Alan must find his missing daughter in time for her birthday with a little help from a rather disturbing-looking mouse named Quintus. The game opens up with Alan waking up and having Quintus turn on the lights, which reveals a rather unique art style that I will say is a very strong point of this title. All 4 chapters are fully voice acted, for better or worse. Mostly for worse, as you'll discover, the audio quality is a little bit lacking. And I fully understand this title comes from a very small team, but a lack of conviction with some of the characters really takes you out of the story. Just to give you an idea, if you happen to come across a lifeless body, don't you think that your "no" would have a little bit more emotion?
No! No, she was...
Jokes aside, perhaps the story would have lured me in a little bit deeper if I had been able to successfully complete all 4 chapters in succession. Fortunately for me, that wasn't necessary because it wouldn't have been possible due to apparent game-breaking bugs. The game's chapter selection screen does allow you to jump to any chapter regardless of whether you completed the prior one, which is super helpful, though ideally you would like to complete all chapters in order to properly digest the story. My biggest qualm with Quintus, which is fun because I get to do Q alliteration, but it's not so much the writing in this title as it is the game's overall performance.
Quintus!
And that aforementioned voice acting. For lack of a proper term, the game runs like ass. Quintus plays like a walking simulator, but to my pleasant surprise also has some horror elements to it, which happen to be my favorite part of this title. You'll run into some jump scares, some satanic themes, and some eerie musical compositions, all which add to the element of terror and suspense. The actual gameplay, on the other hand, is a little bit lackluster. For the most part, you're going to be either controlling Alan or Quintus the mouse. The game is controlled from the first-person perspective, and the majority of what you'll be doing is walking around, inspecting various elements in the environments, and solving rudimentary puzzles. The game itself isn't necessarily long, though you will find yourself meandering about for long periods of time just trying to figure out what to do next. The game doesn't have any waypoints or maps or guides for you to rely on, so you have to depend on various visual clues in the environments themselves. For example, a cat running in a particular direction that you will inevitably lose because it's super fast and you are super slow, even at a running speed. Everything Alan does feels slow and sluggish, including the camera sensitivity, which defaults to a 2. You're definitely going to want to bump that up to at least a 5 in the limited options menu that's provided. This isn't helped by the poor frame rate on the Nintendo Switch, which certainly triggered my motion sensitivity. Difficulty-wise, Quintus isn't a challenging game when it's actually working. The only time I actually consulted a walkthrough was when I was trying to figure out whether the game was broken or I was just being an idiot. Turns out the game was broken. I literally spent ages walking around the corridors of this record company with a key in hand, only to find out that the key didn't work at the archives where it was supposed to. I retraced my steps, I consulted a guide, nothing seemed to work, so I just skipped to the next chapter. I didn't seem to have a choice. I'd say it would probably only take you 1 to 2 hours to complete an entire walkthrough. Handheld or docked, one of the scariest parts about Quintus is the lack of polish, particularly in the frame rate department. It's going to perform sub 30 frames per second, regardless of how you play it, and if your playthrough is anything like mine, you might want to call an exterminator because you won't just be dealing with rodents but also bugs. As another example of technical difficulties, the simple act of picking up and examining an object can sometimes be made more difficult by the game's performance. For example, looking at pictures on the wall, the game prompts you to press X to inspect an object, and you find yourself pressing X over and over again with no response, only to press Y and receive the intended result. Also, picking up objects objects and inspecting them in general often made the objects dimmer. I could read the name of the book or magazine on a nightstand better than I could when I actually picked it up to inspect it. Also, those load times, I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed. I genuinely enjoyed some of the visual and artistic choices this game made. Flipping a light switch, for example, brings color and texture to the environments that were otherwise just basic outlines. It's a really nice effect that even the Switch's poor performance couldn't hide. While I can't necessarily speak from personal experience, as I did only play this title on the Switch, it does appear the PC version is clearly superior. There seem to be elements in the PC version that are flat out missing from the Switch version entirely. Watching a PC playthrough, the graphics aren't the only difference between the two. You can see drawers that are open that can't be opened in the Switch version. You can see prompts that appear that simply don't appear in Nintendo's iteration. One thing that will remain consistent, however, is that there is a lovely soundtrack. Again, one of the stronger points of this title. You get a lot of piano-focused tracks as well as some strings which allude to another character in the game. The tracks really help set up and build up an atmosphere and tension, which this title so desperately needs because the voice acting, again, is not super strong and there isn't a whole lot else to speak of as far as sound design goes. Quintus and the Absent Truth very clearly suffers at the hands of the Switch's hardware limitations, a handicap that it really didn't need because it was already struggling to stand on its own. I really like the concept of mixing horror with this childlike whimsy of a narrative story, but the performance issues both in the game itself and in the voice acting really hold it back and detract from the overall experience. The key deterrents that kept me from being positive on this title are the slow pace both of Alan and the camera, as well as the story itself, the mediocre puzzles, and the bugs that just made the game pretty much unplayable, at least how it's intended to be played. You won't find a whole lot by way of replayability, but you do get a chapter entitled The Experience, which allows you to stroll along what looks like a museum that depicts the inspiration behind the creation of Quintus, which is kind of neat. Do be warned though, whether you're choosing the Experience or any of the other chapters out of order, it will erase your previous saved data, so you'll want to make sure that you're either going in order or you just don't give a shit about the actual plot or story, which is totally fair. So proceed with caution, which is kind of good advice in general when it comes to Quintus and the Absent Truth. Oh, and by the way, the ending is, pun fully intended, a little cheesy. If Quintus and the Absent Truth is a game of mousetrap, I feel like the man in the pan flipped on top of my head and a little confused how I got here in the first place.
Thank you so much for supporting clickbait-free content here at I Dream of Indie. We would now like to take a moment to shout out our brave indie warriors and legends that make this channel possible. At the Indie Warriors tier, we have Bill, Christian Cruz, Adriana Amato, CJR, PSC, Julian Colbus, Jesse, Ray Lynn, Marky Mint, Dave Hart, Peekaboo, Lex Noyle, Chic Geek, and Solaru C. And the brave indie legends include Jen Rose, Mitchell Hall, Skeptism, Nathan Moore, Chris Jackson, Mr. W, Blue Francis 14, The Beefarinis, Business Cody, Chiron, Jace Glover, King of the Hatch, Ophidian Mind, Lord Metroid, and C. Coyle. Thank you so much for all that you do for independent developers, publishers, and for I Dream of Indie. Everybody else head down to the description box below. Let's defeat the gaming echo chamber and bring a voice to the voiceless ones in gaming.